is that I felt people were not being honest in these relationships. And I said, if I'm going to write a memoir, I want to be honest about it. Maybe the reason why somebody's a down is because the sex is bad. Did anybody say that? You know, I mean, and what happened, I've also realized as an activist, we've come to a period of time, especially coming after a women's movement, that there's more sympathy towards women. So I'll give you another. If we switch the political scandals from men to women, right, in terms of language, do we say that so-and-so is a slut? Or look at how quickly the relationship between Sarah Palin and Glenn Rice disappeared. Nobody was going there. I mean, all of a sudden what happens, we're at a time now when we're writing these memoirs. If you say certain things as a woman, you can get away with certain things. If you say something as a man, as a male, it's seen differently. And I'm trying to say at this time, coming through this particular political period, I want to say, okay, this is what's happening in these relationships. And when I turn on the TV shows and there's people are always very sympathetic. Oh, so-and-so walked out on Schwarzenegger and all this. Yeah. But what about, what's the other side of the story? You see what I'm saying? There's two sides of the story. I learned that from my first memoir. And this is a big issue between me and my sister. I knew that my brother left the monastery because my mother manipulated him out of the monastery. She could not give her son up to God. You see what I'm saying? So she wrote letters all the time manipulating him back to leave the monastery, and my brother left the monastery, he came out, he got a job in a bank, and he was miserable and depressed for the rest of his life. And the reason why I'm here on this panel as a writer, because he said, baby brother, if you have some dreams, get as far away from your mother as possible. Now, my sister, she said, oh, no, you're wrong. That didn't happen. Your mother was like that. My mother died last year. Okay? My mother's birthday was September 19th, 1 year. My sister found under the bras and all the other stuff, you know, that my brother's letters. And in the letter which he gave to me, my brother is arguing with my mother about staying in the monastery. Now here I wrote a memoir, knowing this, because from a conversation with my brother, and I said, he's not here, I have to tell this story. And this shaped our entire family, because I would not be here if he didn't come out of the monastery. And he saw that he gave up his dream, and his gift to me, okay, was his support.
Well, I lied because I don't want to run out of time, so let's go straight to your questions then. So please, go right ahead.
I have two questions. The first one, several of you have alluded to an answer. For example, I've read a memoir by Mary Karr, and I find that she uses a very imaginative approach to the truth. At an earlier session here this afternoon, a woman who wrote a memoir based somewhat on her condition as a borderline personality disorder. She said that she advised, leave realism behind. And as I say, you've already touched on this matter, but I'd like to hear more about how you feel about presenting facts and the truth. I differentiate between facts and the truth. The second question, many years ago, a literary agent suggested that I write a memoir. And only recently did she tell me that nowadays the only memoirs you can sell are celebrity memoirs. So unless you have a monster mother or some critical and exotic disease, what kind of obstacle is there in publishing a memoir?
And, did you want to ask this question to the whole panel?
I think the whole panel is eminently qualified to answer.
Well, I was a daily newspaper reporter, so I set great store by facts. And people approach memoir in a lot of different ways. I interviewed more than 100 people. I traveled to Iraq twice. I traveled to Israel twice. I spent time in national archives on 3 continents. I looked through old shoeboxes of letters and photographs. I really wanted to be able to get as sort of cinematic sort of evidence to sort of paint a cinematic portrait as I could. Because I think, and there are some memoirists who sort of interview one ant and then imagine the rest. People, I think, and I think memoirs are sort of an inherently subjective exercise. They're not supposed to be history. They're not supposed to be biography. They're the sense that an author makes now of something that happened in the past. They're not an account of the past. They're the author's conjuring of the past to understand something about their lives now. And so that is subjective, and it's nothing other than that. And I think you kid yourself if you think that memoir is something beside that. So it exists on a spectrum of sort of verisimilitude. And I also think that you have, I'll keep this brief, I also think you have a contract with the reader. So that at some point in your memoir, and I do this in a note on method at the beginning, just tell your readers how you did it. There's no shame in that. Most of them will spend, it's a page. Here's what I did. I interviewed 100 people. I traveled all these places. In a few places where the facts were where I knew something had happened, but I didn't know exactly how it happened, I used all of the available evidence I had to imagine how the dialogue would have been most likely to have unfolded based on the evidence that I had amassed. So I took, and the sort of analogy I use is to take a sort of black and white, low resolution image that you know is true, and then turn it into high resolution color. Can you make stuff up out of whole cloth that didn't happen the way James Fry did? No, not in my book. But the way you get around that, and it is just by honesty, just let your readers know, either in a note on method, or some people actually do it right in the text. I wasn't there when my father died, but I imagine myself standing beside him as the nurses came. You permit yourself to sort of travel down that road in your head, but do it on the page. Don't hide it. So that's how I would reckon with that particular problem, which is one that has to be dealt with memoir.
Ethelbert, I'd like you to respond as well, because as you said before, your memoir came to revelation. Yeah. So I know that your method was very different in some ways.
Very different, and then what I was reading Marquez, and so what happened, you read Father, it's very magical, I mean, it's like that. And then someone said that the fifth inning is very postmodern. What happens when you read the fifth inning, you get into the process of you writing this memoir, okay? And then I'm creating what you see happening in the ballpark. In the ballpark, you see the various advertisements and stuff. So all of a sudden, and the scoreboard changing. So in my memoir, I'm bringing in excerpts from my blog. I got letters from people. I interviewed my son. I put their words in there. So you get all this sort of things moving around. And then I'm making sure throughout it, because it is baseball, there's a lot of baseball facts. Okay. I mean, Kirsten's here. She was my first reader and editor of the book, and I talked about ending. She changed the ending of it, and it made me aware that with the read, dealing with all these issues that we've been talking about, but then getting back to storytelling, you want a happy story. So even though I was wrestling with my relationship with my wife and everything, and marriage and stuff, baseball is a game that begins and ends at home. So you see me coming full circle, and my wife is coming down to VCCA, the Amherst, Virginia, to pick me up. So I'm aware that, okay, this memoir has been written during this period of time, just like these innings, and now here it is, it's going back home. If you hadn't read it, and it would have ended, and it wouldn't have been what we talked about earlier about storytelling, and I would have missed it. And so I to some extent, I tinkered with the game. But then that's the influence of steroids on baseball.
And then in your first memoir, you chose not to do the research of going back and reading. I mean, that was a conscious decision on your part.
There are things in memoir where somebody said, Ethelbert, I don't even live on this street. I said, you do now. Because it's memory. I have a bad memory.
Right. And the second part of the gentleman's question was about, writing a memoir that's not a celebrity memoir, and how that process went for you guys. I guess mostly the book market.
Yes, this is what I'm told. This is what I'm told.
These guys are celebrities.
So, I think you're all celebrities.
Yeah.
Well, I think that I think there's always a market for good stories, and I think that I certainly benefited from having a story to tell in it and sensing this is the time to tell it. As I mentioned, it was in the news. Not my family story, but something similar. It would make people interested. And I think that happens a lot with a memoir that isn't ripped from the headlines, but certainly draws upon, people are thinking about this subject. I think that happens a lot. And so you can see this sort of a cycle of 2 years after something is happening, there'll be some books about that thing or related to that thing, because that's how long it takes a book to come into the world. So I think there will always be a market for good stories, well told. It's probably more challenging than it used to be to propose a memoir to a publisher, and they say, well, sounds great, here's a check. That's probably more challenging than it used to be in sort of the heyday of memoirs.
You're saying now you need a full manuscript, is that what you're trying to say?
That's what I'm guessing. I don't know. I don't know, because I think I got in under the wire.
Right.
But from what I'm told, I mean, if you have a full manuscript, and it's great, you will find a publisher.
I think, just to respond briefly to you, I think there are two aspects to what will make a memoir saleable. One is originality of your idea. If you're proposing another 12-step memoir, it's going to be pretty tough for anyone to pay attention. If you're proposing another memoir, about how you lost 150 pounds or overcame bad credit, these are such a crowded market. People have done it a lot, and they haven't done it particularly well. You really have to, you have to do something that stands out. The other is to have such a compelling voice and such a compelling style, and be such a good writer that you can elevate dross to literature. And they're Augustine Burroughs. I mean, someone who you just, as soon as you read that first sentence, you feel like you're in the hands of a powerful storyteller. Then you can deal with sort of the pedestrian. And I think the best of the best have both. They have an original idea. You're taking us to a place that people have not gone before, and at the right time, possibly for the market. And you have a very compelling storyteller's voice. I mean, one thing I just turned out before I came was the opening lines of Frank McCourt's "Angela's Ashes." He's writing about an Irish childhood. That's been done before, but I mean, listen to these lines, and you get a sense of how powerful a storyteller you're in the hands of. When I look back on my childhood, I wonder how I survived it at all. It was, of course, a miserable childhood. The happy childhood is hardly worth your while. And so when you hear that, the picture of the speaker immediately appears in your head, and you want to stay with this guy. And so stories about happy childhoods have been written many times. But so he's taking a sort of a more well-trod sort of idea or subject, but his voice is so powerful and so seductive that you stay with him.
If I could also add, I think that we've a couple of times mentioned the scandal of A Million Little Pieces and how this fellow, James Fry, is now synonymous with fictional memoirs, or fictionalized memoirs. But I just to point out the unfairness of this, if to have sympathy for that, for writing a memoir that's found to be bumped up a little bit, I'm sure Frank McCourt did not want to be fact-checked. Sincerely, a beautiful voice, but writing dialogue from 65 years ago, you have to decide, I'm just going to go with it, and the neighbors are always going to say it wasn't like that, And I think it happened to McCourt in Ireland. People said it wasn't quite like that.
His brother's written. I mean, you get families writing memoirs, and each of their stories is different. The same family, but different. So yes, absolutely.
Another question from the audience? Come on, I know you have questions. Jim.
I noticed when you three of you were talking that you made your memoirs, forgive me for saying this, sound fairly wholesome. I mean, you were talking about healing and bridge building and bridge burning, sort of another thing that other people do. But I would guess that both writing, at least on some level, there's supposed to be some rage involved. No? I mean, was there anything, could you talk about anything during the process? Not maybe they necessarily got into the book, because the idea of expressing one's rage in public is different. Maybe rage is too strong, but anger. If you're delving into family, as you all are, I would imagine that it's not simply about holding hands and singing kumbaya.
There's no anger in these families.
Right. So you're talking a little bit about at least as anger as part of the process. It's not necessarily evident in the final result.
Well, I would answer that in terms of looking at how readers respond to some of my books. I was thinking about The School Without Walls that we read in the fifth inning, and had read Father and Word. They hated the fifth inning. They said, it's depressing. It's very depressing. Last week, for example, I was doing Skyping with students up at CUNY, and they read the book, and then when I came, they Skyping. Oh man, we thought this guy would be really like on medication or something. What happened? They expected a different thing. But what happened? When we looked, especially within our society, and especially African American family, issues of depression, which were not discussed like 7 years ago, are being discussed now. And that's what I felt also as a memoir writer, that perhaps I'm writing to save my children. Why? Because I'm not a medical doctor or in terms of expert mental health, but I know my father suffered from mental illness. okay? But what happened? We didn't have those terms. You're working the post over, you don't have time to sit on the couch, you know, on the weekends or something like that. So it's not diagnosed. But I look at what my daughter told me just a couple years ago. She said, you know how you read on the thing, well, do not take this birth control medication if you have depression. Right. So she said, Daddy, and so here I am at BU crying in my dorm. If somebody had told me. Right. Well, I think that when somebody reads the fifth inning, they're gonna, it's kind of dark, okay? You know, but then I said, why are baseball games ended in the fifth inning? It's because of darkness, rain, storm, the lights go out, right? So that's basically, once again, me tying into that metaphor and saying, yeah, this is not a happy read. So now I'm very aware when somebody brings me into a school, you know, I'm concerned about the age level, okay? Because I'm saying, okay, I want to bring this into the classroom because I think certain topics need to be discussed. But I know that, look at it, it's not a happy book. It's not a book filled with rage, but the depression stuff sometimes leads to that. And so I think it's a very important topic to at least touch that base.
Ariel, do either of you want to comment on this question?
I'll add to it. I think that in my family story, I mentioned there are a lot of darker elements. There's an abuse element that's a theme throughout the whole book. But for myself, in the writing of it, I wanted to be away from that anger by the time I was writing. And so the anger that is appropriate to the story, and to the two characters, being my family, within the story, is there in the story, but it's not in the narrative voice.
Were there drafts maybe where where perhaps the tone was different?
If there were drafts, it would have been my undergraduate poetry. Yeah, when I was working through it, and by the time I was writing it, I was well removed from it, and I was trying to understand the people involved as people, including the priest who was involved in the abuse case with my mother, who part of the story I tell is that late in life, when she's 60, she tracks him down. It turns out I get my investigative gene from my mom because my mom took out all these classified ads in newspapers where she knew he had been stationed as a priest that just said, "Did you remember Father Creighton? Please call this number." And she managed to track him down. She went and she confronted him, and so in the course of getting she went through the lawsuit, and I got all the files. So I knew everything about this guy, and he was one of these notoriously bad priests who there'd be letters written to the archdiocese saying, "This man is going to kill someone." Truly, this is the kind of thing I found. And so there was a lot of anger, I guess, or there could have been a lot of anger, it certainly was on my mother's part, toward the church and towards this man. But when I sat down to write it, part of my job as a writer was understanding this man was human as well, and trying not to demonize. Though it would have been very easy, trying to allow every human in the book to be a full human and understanding what they had been through. And maybe that's not right for every book, because some books you would want the author to have that kind of distance, but it felt right.
Other questions? Oh, good. We have 3 more. I'm so happy. So first you, and then you, and then you. Okay.
Well, since the book critics are sponsoring the forum here, I just wanted to ask about criticism, whether any praise or critique particularly was meaningful to you or stuck out, or if you learned anything from the critics. It can be brief.
I can cover my ears and it'll make you speak more honestly.
I don't know about critics. I see my publisher back there.
I mean, I think we learned from, I certainly, this is my first book, so I actually sent out copies to about 4 or 5 other writers who, when the book was about twice as long as it wound up being published, because I really felt like we all need critics, and I think, and often extremely valuable before publication, so that after publication, if you get more before publication, hopefully you get less after. Negative criticism anyway. But I really felt like there are only things that other people can see. People have no stake in your story. If you're reaching for universals, it's not enough just to show it to someone who knows you. It's show it to someone who doesn't know you so well, who maybe will be sympathetic but doesn't know the ins and outs of your story. I got a lot of valuable feedback that I'm extremely grateful for, that I would not have, that I think helped refine the story. I mean, your editor, hopefully, if you have a good editor, will also give you that. Unfortunately, that is fairly uncommon. A lot of editors don't spend a lot of time on manuscripts. I happen to have a really good one, Algonquin Books, who really, I thought, read the book closely, gave me a lot of good feedback. So I think criticism in the early phases does play a role. I mean, I think all of us, obviously, we like to focus on the good reviews and tune out the bad ones. I think you do learn. I think when if there's a pattern in the reviews, if it's just one sort of bad review and it doesn't echo anything that anyone else is saying, you might just, for your own sake, choose to ignore it. But if you're hearing the same thing over and over again, I think you have to stay true to your art. But I think also, look, I'm not someone who. I think that what we do is also a bit like carpentry. We can always get better, and so I think there's absolutely a role for criticism, not really for us, but for readers who are deciding what to read, or who may not want to read the book at all, but want to get a 1,000-word description of it.
Yeah, for me, the critics I was really concerned about, especially with the fifth inning, were the baseball critics. The baseball, and to have a number of people, even on their blogs, say, okay, they love this in terms of how I was using baseball to explain, their life. In fact, one person of Massachusetts decided to use the term fifth inning as opposed to midlife crisis. And she thanked me for that language. So I felt that was very important.
I guess similarly, somewhat, but I was happiest to read reviews in the Catholic press. In a lot of Catholic papers, you'd think they wouldn't like the book just because of what it was about. But I was always very pleased when someone who, in terms of their church politics, wouldn't like the story said, well, he got the history right. He understands what it was like at the time. But criticism aside, in terms of how the book was just people hearing about the book and its reception is the word I'm looking for. The greatest thrill for me was that my parents became involved in sort of our media appearances. I was on Fresh Air with my parents. I was on The View with my parents, and we were actually on The View on the same day as George Clooney. So I went away to get some makeup or something, and I came back to the green room. My mom's standing there with George Clooney, and I see he's signing something for her, getting an autograph, and then I realize George Clooney is signing my book because it was the only paper my mother had. So really, I felt thrilled to be able to give that to my mom as a sort of
The book.
Well, no, that experience, just knowing that telling her story helped her own her story, and was really felt good about being public about it.
Yeah, my question was actually kind of a little bit about genre, process, and personal experience, because what I'm hearing from all three of you is that you had a certain experience of poetry, I hear journalism, a background that actually lent itself to the writing of your memoir. I guess I'm wondering though, was it ever difficult? Did you ever have to put the poet to bed? Did you ever have to wrestle with the wanting to be too research oriented, or how did it really inform the writing?
Well, I guess for me, it was just the ability to move from one genre to the next, because when I started writing poetry, I wrote very short poems. I didn't think I had it in me to write a memoir, let alone do another memoir. And so that was a surprise, okay, for me, and one that I'm still surprised. And every now and then, I do something which some musicians don't do. I know Miles didn't do it, and that is going back and looking at it. And I said, well, wow, how did I do this? Okay. Because I wasn't approaching my writing this way, but this is where the memoir has changed me, and I think because of the memoir, I'm probably writing more essays now. Okay, so that's what happened. Now I haven't decided to use the discipline to tackle a novel, but that's what I might think about doing down the road, and it's just that discipline that you get from working.
And I was a daily journalist for about 12 years, and one of the cardinal rules of objective journalism is leave yourself out of it. Don't interpret. Certainly no eyes, God forbid, and be fair, balanced. And if you do those things in the memoir, I don't think you're going to succeed. I think then you're just writing sort of an account. Your memoirs work because there is this sense of someone who's steering it and for whom this material is meaningful in some way. And if that voice isn't there, some of the best sort of most accomplished journalists. There was an editor of the New York Times who who wrote his memoirs, which was very poorly received. He did a great job reporting it. He talked to everyone he should have reported. The doctors interviewed his mom for like, 15 hours. He interviewed his dad for 25 hours. He interviewed his brother, and it's all there, but there's no heart. And so I had a program of sort of self-education. I mean, I read a lot of memoir. I wanted to figure out how it was done. I mean, I wanted to find other memoirs written by sort of people who were younger about the generations that came before. How did people do this who had done it well? And in the course of doing that, I was very methodical, I guess. You can study this stuff. I'm not someone who believes that you're born with it. I think there are people, perhaps a small number, who are born to write, but most of us work hard at it, refine our craft. We get better year after year. I cringe at some of my first newspaper stories. They're awful. But you see as you go from year to year. The nice thing about newspaper stories, you can every couple of days there's another one. You can see yourself improving, and I think that so there's a lot of for me there was a lot of unlearning of what passed for what was good writing as a newspaper reporter was not good writing as a memoirist.
Are you referring to the Lebanon book?
Yeah.
Well, for me to answer the same question, I always intended to be a novelist before I was a memoirist. So I ended up doing it the other way around. But when I began the memoir, I still, in my heart of hearts, wanted to be a novelist. And so I asked myself, is there a way I can write this memoir, this book about my family, as if I was writing the great American novel? And so I think that allowed me some freedom. While I did believe in reporting it and sticking to detail that I could uncover and research, it allowed me to be more expansive about it, and to feel more free to create scenes rather than just descriptions of things. And so for me, working between genres was very helpful. Both thinking as a novelist while writing a memoir, and then thinking as a memoirist while writing a novel. It helped in both directions.
Well, I have a few questions, but I'll try to make it short.
We're running out of time, so
Yeah.
you choose one, because then I'll have time for one more question before we finish.
I just wondered about your self-editing process, like how many drafts that you have to do, write a memoir, and before you say you're satisfied with my goal, and then I can ready to publish, things like that. And also, since your memoir is come from your family, will your family member be the first reader, or will your first reader help you to consider your work is done, or I wonder that. Yeah.
I was given advice very, very early on: don't show it to your family. First of all, what that suggests to them early on is that it's going to be written by committee. That everyone's got to say, well, what do you think? What do you think? How do you like this paragraph? Oh, you don't like your portrayal here? Well, maybe I can change a few words. You just don't want to go there. It's a can of worms. And I think that this is your telling of the family story. And so I'll just answer that. It's not groupthink. It's not a product of the family writing together. What I did, and because I was concerned, because I was writing about a sort of obscure group of people, the Kurdish Jews, about whom very little has been written, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't making any gross errors of misrepresentation, even though I'd done a lot of research and a lot of reporting. So only when the book had reached the proof phase, which is where very, very little can be changed. Publishers hate it if you change too much once it's already proofs. I showed it to my father, and made it very clear to him that we're not eliminating chapters, we're not changing anything about the way I'm portraying you, but if I've made any gross factual errors, or if I've said anything about the Kurdish Jews, about how they behave in a particular scene, that if you were a Kurdish Jew, you would point to and say, Kurdish Jews would never say or do that, I need you to tell me, because I wanted that to be right, because I was worried about reviews in the community's own press. I didn't want them to look at this and say, like, this guy's full of it. So people do this differently. Some people do show their family. I just think that you're opening up a can of worms to you.
Well, sometimes you need the can of worms to fish.
Yeah,
So
that's right.
what happened, in my first memoir, Falling Words, I wrote to the writer June Jordan, I used to go out with, and I said, okay, I want to make sure I got our meeting right. So I sent the draft of our meeting that had included the memoir. I sent it to her. She loved it, and she wrote back a letter that was so beautiful about our relationship that's at the end of Falling Words. I just took that right in there. When I'm writing the fifth inning, I sent a part of it to a woman who's so like my biographer, Dr. Julie Galbraith. She didn't like it. She said, oh, being a critic. She said, well, this isn't going here. I put her statement in my book, and I just kept on writing, So here it is. I'm interacting, and this is sort of how the technology works, I'm interacting. I showed it to somebody, and I said, oh, I'll put that in my book, So you can see, when you get to fifth inning, she said, oh, I don't think it doesn't have a plot. It's going all over. Yeah, right. So now you can read what she says and agree or disagree, and we keep on with the inning. We play ball, you know what I'm saying? And so what happened, this was once again showing somebody, not just saying, okay, can I use it, but actually incorporating them into the text. You see? In the case of the first memoir, what June wrote back to me was so beautiful. I said, I'm gonna put this back in I'll put this on the page. And it served as a wonderful ending for Father and Wife.
I actually did let my family read as I went. I gave them sort of 100-page chunks, but I made clear that they didn't have veto power, that the book was my book. But I also was, they didn't know this, but I was employing an old journalist trick of getting it wrong, which is to say, if you give someone something that is clearly wrong, they'll talk a lot more and explain why you're wrong, and you can pull things out of them that way. So that really worked for me, and it wasn't a collaborative process. It wasn't by committee. I felt, for better or worse, I was in control of their story, and they knew that, and they trusted me, and I think it worked out. But just to answer your other question about the editing process, I'm a real evangelist for my approach, so I'm going to tell you. What I do when I have something that I think is done is I read it aloud and I record it, and then I listen to it maybe 10 times in a row. And every time you hear it, you forget a little bit that it's you who wrote it. It really works. And this is I found that it tricks my brain into being an editor rather than a writer. And when you can listen through a draft and there are no problems, nothing really catches your ear as it's just not being right, and then you have something that's done and you can share with someone else.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. Yes, you in the back.
I kind of have a question about inventiveness and construction in memoir. We kind of mentioned earlier, so there's kind of an explosion of memoirs being published, and with that there's been a lot of boundaries pushed. For instance, bringing poeticism into your work, or kind of novelistic features into work, or kind of one that comes to mind is Eggers' Heartbreaking Work, which is almost painfully self-aware and self-constructed. So I was wondering if you think that there are any constructions that work particularly well, or if there are any that you consider a violation, as you put earlier, a violation of the contract with the reader.
Well, I think it's something Ariel said earlier, that there's this, what did you say, a contract?
Yeah.
There's this trust, and so long as you create that trust, because first you have to earn it, so long as you create that trust and then keep that trust, you can do anything. And what that means to me is that if you want to have a 5-page section that is something you imagined happened, just say, I imagined it happened like this. And then the reader won't say, well, how does he know that she said that to him then? And if you're just honest with the reader about this being a written work that they are engaging in, I think you can get away with anything within memoir, so long as you're honest about it and you're not trying to fool them. I was going to say you're not trying to manipulate them, but of course you are. I mean, the whole act is manipulating a reader to have them feel what you want them to feel. But as long as you're honest about it, I think you can do whatever you want.
I mean, the way I've also heard it described is if you are doing invention of any kind, it should be in the service of your own story's truth. It shouldn't be for purposes of misleading. If you're doing it to sex something up, or to mislead, or to misdirect, then I think it pushes some boundaries. But if you're doing it to deepen the emotional truth of the story, and you can find a way to do that, I think you do have some latitude. Again, I think memoir is pretty mushy. I mean, I think this notion that I hear some of my daily journalist friends, insist that memoir has to be 100% verifiable fact. I can pin down every single fact with like footnotes. That's not what memoir is. I mean, I think we have these large sort of overbroad categories of fiction and nonfiction. Do we get upset at like J.D. Salinger because how dare you call this capturing the right fiction? Clearly, some of this is based on your own life. This is you can't get away with this. But when it comes to nonfiction, all of a sudden you say, well, some of this reeks or has the whiff of invention. Well, it's not either or. I think there is this sort of spectrum, and I think as long as you're honest, and going back to this idea of honesty with the reader, and it's in the service of the emotional truth of your story, then you can do it. I'm in favor of doing a little less of it, but not. But I'm perfectly fine with inventing or imagining dialogue and small scenic details. Obviously, I don't know what my grandmother said to my grandfather. 80 years ago. I wasn't there, but I know a lot about them. I know how they spoke. I've heard recordings of them, and so to the extent that I can replicate, would I have them talking to each other like surfers in Los Angeles in the 1980s? No, that'd be absurd. But so you have to sort of get, there is a sense of sort of getting inside the characters. All these characters happen to be real. That I think you are very much committed to do. And people have just there's no right answer for this. Everyone on the panel might answer that question.
Yeah, for me, see what happens because and especially in the fifth inning, I'm playing around with baseball. So there are places where I'm just making stuff up because those are balls. You see, and I said if you read something, you say people said, Ethelbert, has your wife read this? Then I know that's a strike. You know what I'm saying? And so what happens is there's places where I just go off on a tangent, and that's a ball. And sometimes, it's just there for the sound of it, There's parts of the fifth inning where I just took a blog entry that I really liked, and I stuck it in the book, and you know how sometimes a pitcher loses control, and all of a sudden he's walking like, 2-3 hitters in a row and the base is loaded. I wanted to have that. I wanted to have that because this is what I was dealing with in terms of the structure of the memoir. It was baseball, and every aspect of baseball I think is found in this book, from how the stadiums are designed to how the game is played. There's a prose poem that I stuck in there, which is just from the angle of a pitcher. And what I find interesting in terms of construction, a student last week asked me this question, which was so profound. Says, as a pitcher, are you making in your life? Are you making adjustments to the lineup? I was like, oh man, okay. I had to stop and think about it. It was I had never looked at it this way. But all these things, and I don't know how that equates with the truth. But in terms of something for me as a writer now to sit back and look at it, I said, I have to look at this. You see, and then what was happening? People will ask you because we're still living. They're asking you, okay, so you wrote this memoir. What's happening with your life? What did you resolve? What are you still wrestling with? And that's a very important question at the end of the day. Okay? Just who are we? You have a slice of life. That's nice. But who are we now? Who are we becoming? And this is the thing that I feel the memoir is very, very important at this historical moment. I always tell people, write your memoir before someone writes your biography.
Well, on that note, let's please give it up.